47, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you older than that. 47, who was sexually abused when he was 14 years old, that carried on for about 3 years. His parents were very close. His father was an elder to another family, and the perpetrator was a ministerial servant, which is equivalent to a deacon, more or less. And because of that close relationship, Michael Rust, this perpetrator, gained access to Michael Ewing, our client. And the Jehovah's Witnesses, so you know, they live in this sort of parallel universe. They believe that they live in what they call the truth. And the rest of us, we live in this outside world contaminated by Satan, and they find us to be what they refer to as bad association. So they don't really associate with the outside world other than what is necessary, of course, to go to work or go to school, but they are very insular and very close with each other, and they are taught since they're little children that they are to obey without question the elders and the leadership of their congregation, and certainly of the hierarchy of the organization. And you'll notice I keep calling it an organization. They do not call themselves a church. They do call themselves an organization. Go to jw.org. So Michael was molested by Mike Rust for 3 years. And at some point, when Michael was 21 years old, and he could no longer take the pain that caused him, the embarrassment, the shame that he was feeling, he disclosed that abuse. And the elders were advised of that. And they conducted their judicial committee, this tribunal that they conduct. And what was the result? Michael was disfellowshipped, which is the equivalent of being excommunicated. Why? Because at the age of 14, they considered that he had engaged in homosexual conduct and did no longer deserve to be a member of that religion or that organization, as was Michael Rust. They were both disfellowshipped. So Michael suffered punishment for what he experienced. Heather's family has a similar story. They were very close to Don Nicholson, who was an elder in her congregation in Wallsburg, New York. And the two families became very close. Her father was an elder and happened to also be a police officer. They spent a tremendous amount of time together, the two families. Nicholson had 2 children, 2 little girls of his own. What they didn't know in about 1979 or so, when the abuse started, she was 78, when she was about 2 or 3 years old, what her family didn't know is what the elders of their congregation knew, and that is that Don Nicholson was a pedophile. He'd abused his own daughters and others. All told, we know of about 18 women, girls at the time, who've been abused by this guy. At some point, when about 1982, someone else also reported Nicholson, and Heather and her family reported Nicholson. And they converged on the family, elders, what they call circuit overseers, who go around and they do a circuit on behalf of the watchtower and the organization, the hierarchy of the organization, and check on the different congregations. And they converged on the family and said, don't go to the police. Whatever you do, don't go to the police. Don't bring a reproach upon Jehovah. God forbid. They didn't care about Heather. They didn't do anything. They disfellowshipped him. That means they excommunicated, but they didn't tell anyone in the congregation why. They never do. They never do. The secret remains within a select few elders and the governing entities of the watchtower. They discourage going to the police. Now, Heather's father was a police officer. He was very conflicted. What do I do? He was so indoctrinated by the belief that he went to the elders. He didn't go to the police. The police found out because her school found out. And they were mandatory reporters, as are the clergy of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They're mandatory reporters, but they just don't do it. But the police did. And there was an investigation, and Nicholson was pled guilty and spent 3.5 years in prison. He's out. He's become a Jehovah's Witness again. He's been in the organization. He's been disfellowshipped, I think, 2, 3, maybe 4 times. She'll tell you this story. And despite the fact they've known of the abuse of multiples of young girls by this time. So this story needs to be told. These lawsuits are going to tell this story, and I'm going to introduce Michael to you, and he's going to start and tell you a little bit about his story. Thanks. Oh, I'm sorry, Michael one. I think you want to say
I just want to. Hi, I'm Michael Barish. I'm local counsel, and I'm honored to be that. Thank you. I have to tell you, my firm has represented nearly 600 abused kids, and it's outrageous that it takes a lawsuit to bring justice to these people who in many cases have been waiting 20, 30, 40, in some cases 50 years. But we are going to make these people pay. We're going to get the answers that they deserve. I have to give to come and tell your story. We are not the story. They are the story. We're just lucky enough and thankful enough to be given the opportunity to get you guys the justice you deserve, and we will get the answers that you deserve as well. So Michael, why don't you get up and tell your story.
So basically my childhood growing up was pretty normal. Typical Jehovah's Witness life, minister going out in this administrative service every Saturday morning, going to meetings 3 times a week, going to our conventions, learning what we learn through our parents and through what the organization teaches us. So I felt like, well, I need to get baptized. This is something I want for my life. This is what I want to do, which is the picture of me actually getting baptized. I was 14 years old on that day. And on that day, I met my abuser. That was my reward, right, for dedicating my life to God. Going forward from that point, I wanted to do regular pioneer work, which meant 80 hours a month of volunteer service. And I filled out the application, was approved. Mike Rust, the abuser, was also a regular pioneer and a ministerial servant in the congregation. And he was introduced to me through my father and through other elders. They knew that he worked with the younger brothers in the congregation to help them move forward and become stronger spiritually, supposedly. In the beginning, at the age of 14, when I first met him, we were going out in service a lot, and things kind of seemed normal. This would be the grooming process. As you would continue to go out in the ministry, it would lead to, at some point, probably a couple months after, maybe a month and a half, where we would go and have study. And we would study at his house, where at that point, I was then introduced to pornographic material. Started out as Victoria's Secret card catalogs, moved forward more into pornographic material. That went on for a few months. Then it turned into truth and dare games, turned into, whatever. At about 9 months after I met him is when the touching began. Just like in the movie Spotlight, I happened to watch that before I got here, so I'm going to just lay it out there. I had to perform fellatio many times, hundreds. There was a couple other occasions where it got more serious even than that. So I went through this for about 3 years, remembering that the hours that you do as a pioneer is 80 hours a week, and I'm 80 hours a month, and I'm to be with him. Well, I'm with him 80 hours a month to do this supposedly. So he had an open access to me. I would probably see him 4, 5 times a week. My parents loved him. They did not know what was going on. I did not know how to tell them what was going on. I was ashamed. So I just let it continue to go on because I didn't know how to tell them, and I didn't know how to get away from him. So I was in a real pickle. By the time I was 17, I learned how to break away from all that. I got away from him. I got away from basically my parents' beliefs. I started engaging in drugs, and I started to become a very violent person. Nobody could understand why I was this way. My parents couldn't understand it. They're all on like, what's going on? And I just kept running from the situation. By the time I was 21, as Erwin said, 20 or 21, I'm really not sure which age group, but in that range, I decided to tell my father and my mother what I had dealt with. And when I explained it to him, my dad's first reaction, is he's an elder in the congregation, was, we got to tell the elders. Not let's call the police, not let's get you some help, not this, that, and the other. We got to tell the elders. So we told the elders. And my father made a phone call to Mike Rust, said, you need to tell your elders, because at that point now we were in separate congregations. And so he did. Now, to my knowledge of this, and the way Jehovah's Witnesses do work, judicial committees are private. They do not discuss what's going on across the board. They don't discuss his situation with my elders to discuss with what I had said. They both just decided to disfellowship the two of us for homosexual activity. And of course they also used the fact that I was using drugs as well at that time as part of the disfellowshipping. That was the only way I knew how to really deal with my situation, to try to numb down that pain. Drinking. So here I am today now. All these years I've been fighting with this, trying to figure out how to handle this, try to know how to do this. What do I do? I actually still proclaim to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses. That's my faith structure. That is the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with, is try to hold on to something that I learned as what I believe to be true because of what I've learned through the scriptures. But then they also have to see this. And believe me, guys, and I'm sure you've all researched it. I know I started researching it this year. It's scary how much this is going on throughout this organization and how it seems to be just pushed aside. That doesn't happen anymore. I'm here to make sure it doesn't happen anymore. I'm here to make sure that if there's any voice out there that sees me at my age, recognizing even if they're older, it's time for them to come forward, because it has to happen. This has to be cleansed. It has to be taken care of. So what I hope from all of this is that we start to hear more victims coming forward, whether they're children or grown adults as I am. It's got to be taken care of.
All right, Mike, before you leave, I think they find it interesting. What did he read to you to justify the conduct?
He would many times, because if I felt guilty or if I felt this isn't right, I would get a scripture read to me. We would go into, at that time we had a book in the organization called the Youth Book. There were chapters in there with scriptures in there that were, talking about puberty and going through the change of life and sexual this and that. And somehow he would take the scriptures and the jug and he would flip it and make me feel like this is okay, it's normal. I don't know. I can't explain why I went for it, but I did. And, that's what I have to carry. I still have nightmares. Going to be 48 this year. I still have nightmares. And it's kind of getting lost for words here, but all I do is like, this has got to stop.
Hello, my name is Heather Steele. I'm 48 years old. I was born into the religion, so I didn't know anything different. My parents were best friends with two other elder families, one of them being Don Nicholson. He built my parents' house. He was a contractor. He built his house, and they were almost identical. He started abusing me while I was still in diapers, so 2 or 3, I'm not even sure. The abuse went on for about 10 years. Gradually, it started, I was fondling and stuff, but it did go to oral, and it did go into actual rape after many years. By the time I was about 10 years old, I accidentally told my mom. I was scared to tell. I thought that it was a secret and it was between me and Dawn, and I did not realize that there was a whole world out there that would say this isn't right, this is not what's supposed to be happening. Okay, so when I school and I came home and asked my mom questions, and when she gave me the answers, I realized that what was going on was completely wrong. He had used Jehovah as a lot of when I would question things, and it would be about obeying my elders and respecting parents and everything. So I was very naive to the fact that I didn't have to be living in this kind of situation. I did have the luck of having my father be a police officer, so he definitely believed me. There was no doubt about that. And actually, one of Don's daughters, was abused and had come forward. Then she actually recanted because the parents got to her. And shortly after that, I didn't know about Lynn confessing, but I confessed to my mom by accident, and then they put it all together that both of us couldn't be lying. So that's how we started meeting with the judicial committee. That was torture. It was a bunch of men sitting around praying for Don, having us hold hands while we prayed for him, and my mother was having nothing to do with that. She took me out of the room and just said, that's too much. She doesn't need to be dealing with that. She's dealt with enough. They tried very hard to keep it a secret. The elders met with us probably 5 or 6 times within a month period. Luckily, like I said, my dad was a police officer, so the school got involved, and when the school got involved, my father realized the only choice he really had was to go forward and have him arrested. He did do a couple of years in prison. He got out, I think only 3 years later. He also had a reunification program at the prison where he abused his own daughters on the weekends. He was, at the time, this is back in the early 80s, he had come forward to about 15 other girls, so definitely wasn't alone. He was so manipulative that if he couldn't have access to me, he would arrange to go into my parents' house when they weren't home, take apart my dad's rifles, put them on my mom's side of the bed, scare my mom basically to death, so she wouldn't want to stay alone in the house while my dad was working overnights as a police officer. So of course he'd be like, oh, just bring them over here. So he would do that. That went on for almost a year. So if he hadn't seen us and had access to us either at the Kingdom Hall or at my parents' house or their house, then he would take those measures to make sure that he could get me back to his house. So I didn't really question anything because I didn't know any different until I got to be about 10, 11 years old, and that's when I came forward, I started to realize how terrible everything really was, and that none of the stuff I had thought was true. I felt guilt because I didn't want to not believe in Jehovah or do something against the religion, but at the same time, I wanted to get away from Don. The reason I'm bringing a lawsuit is because I've had no justice in the situation. Yes, he did go to prison, but it was for such a short time, and he found that time to abuse his own daughters. I want to come forward so other people have a voice. It's not an easy situation to come out and tell this kind of story, but if it helps other girls or boys, whatever it is in that congregation, or anywhere, actually, I want to do it for that purpose. And with the Children Victims Act passing, we've waited for years trying to get that to pass, and I'm very, very pleased that it went, and we will be able to find some kind of justice for the situations that we were put in as children growing up in that religion. Is there anything else? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. If there's any questions, fire away.
So, New York will open up the window for child victims to sue.
Right.
What,
August 14th.
what do you have to prove? What evidence do you have to bring?
Well, you're going to have to show, in all of these types of cases, generally they're negligence-based cases, so we're going to have to show that the congregation elders, the Watchtower corporate entity, the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses corporate entity, and the governing body of the organization at the very top, that they were negligent in their policies, in their practices, that they knew, they had reason to know that child abuse existed and was a real problem within their organization. They had no policies for protecting children, and that they knew at some level about the propensities of these particular perpetrators at the time that our clients were sexually molested. And then they covered it up. They ratified it. They ratified this behavior. They allowed it. They covered it up. They accepted it. In other words, if they didn't do anything about it, they essentially accepted it. So that's the kind of stuff we're going to need to prove. Now, I think we're going to be all right.
So you don't need to prove individual molestation in each case. You don't need to prove that the elder necessarily committed the act. Or
Oh yeah, no, I mean that. But that's sort of the gravamen of the case is that they were sexually abused by these guys, right? So we're going to have to prove that happened.
How do you do that?
Because there's so many people that they're not alone. And Rust has already admitted that he did it. Nicholson has admitted that he did it in these judicial proceedings, judicial committee proceedings. So I think we'll be able to convince that, and I think they're very credible people. So I think any jury is going to believe that this happened to them. So that's sort of the first step. I mean, obviously we have to prove it happened. But beyond that, then we have to prove who's legally responsible for what happened. Of course, the perpetrator is legally responsible. But then these other parties within the Jehovah's Witness organization are legally responsible. The congregation where this happened, the elders of the congregation who knew about both of these guys in advance and knew while it was happening. The people who oversee the congregations, the Watchtower corporate entity, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of New York, the service where the information goes upstream. Everything kind of goes upstream. So when they have these judicial committees, those are documented. And those documents go up to the corporate entity, to what they call the service department of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They're maintained in a database. And the governing body of the organization is informed of everything. They have their own committees. They are a working group. They dictate policies. They have committees that coordinate with what they call the United States branch and branches around the world. So this goes all the way up the chain to the top. And that's why we're suing the top this time around. We haven't done that in our other cases, but we're going to be doing it here.
Is there a precedent for naming the top religious leaders in clergy abuse cases, period?
Well, you know, the unique circumstance here is that we have the equivalent of the Pope that's a resident of the United States and operates out of the United States, specifically the state of New York. So they're not a sovereign entity like the Vatican and the Pope, which makes it near impossible to sue the Pope. I know some of us in the past have tried, but this is a different situation. You have a United States domiciled entity, a group of guys that are calling these shots, and I think they're going to be amenable to being sued in these lawsuits here in New York.
Can you talk about where Mike Rust and Don Nicholson are now? Do they still have access?
Yeah. All right, so as far as Mike goes, 3 years when I first got into counseling, because I finally realized I needed to get therapy. We did a Google search, my therapist and I. We found him. He was a youth minister at the Calvary Chapel Boca Raton church. At that point, I wasn't really ready to deal with it. I was still going through my own therapy, and she was like, we got to do something. We got to do something. As things started, I learned how through my therapy what needs to happen. I finally got legal representation, and I told them where he was and what he had access to, because he had put himself in position again to be around younger people. He's no longer employed by that church. The church did terminate his position. So I don't know where he's at this moment, but this is within the last month and a half. So as far as I know, he still lives in Boca Raton. As far as I know, he's still unemployed. But, Calvary Chapel got on that and took care of that situation. They probably wanted to get in front of it before, this happened. He's a bad person. In my mind, I'm sure everybody else here would agree with me, he was a very bad person. I did forget to tell you that when I was around 16, he had been accused of this by another boy in the congregation. And that boy happened to be the son of his fiancée. He was 11, if I remember right. Now, he did get on the phone to me, and he did say, you need to keep your mouth quiet. If someone starts asking questions, you got to stay quiet, because you're going to get in trouble. He assured me I would get in all this trouble. Again, when you can manipulate scriptures the way he knew how to manipulate it, when he knew how to manipulate a person's mind, he had a hold of my mind from the moment I was 14 years old. My therapist said, because I go through this, like, why? Why did I allow it to go on so long? But once you get a hold of a person and you've manipulated them to a point, they're stuck in that spot. And I to conduct their own internal investigation to find out if something had happened. But that's the situation of Mike Rust. He is an unemployed priest right now, and that's that.
Don is currently living in New Jersey. He does have advanced prostate cancer, so he's no longer able to have victims, but for many, many years, his wife would even breed puppies so that there'd be families that would come with their kids and stuff. So it never stopped. Even after he got out of prison, I know of other girls and other people that he's been affecting. So he's never really, even though he did that short time in prison, he's never really paid for it, and he is living quite comfortably in New Jersey. That's it.
Any other questions?
Do you think that this window opening up is a way to further the goal that you've had for a long time about exposing this child abuse database? Is there anything about the volume of cases that could come forward that would increase the odds of this database becoming public?
Yeah, I'm certainly hoping that the more noise there is about this, and the more victims that come forward, and the more people start demanding that this database be made public, that this information at least be, at the minimum, be provided to law enforcement. I have some of it under court order. I'm subject to a gag order by several courts, so I can't talk about what I've seen in this database, but I'll leave that to your imagination.
I'd just like to add one thing. All of you have been following this story with rabid interest of Jeffrey Epstein, and obviously his suicide was front page news. It's on the news all day today. This is far, far worse. I'm not condoning anything that Epstein did, but that guy used his money and his power to get women to do what they did for him. These people were abused by emissaries of God, of the church. And as both of them talked, as Michael and Heather talked about, there was an element of trust. And these abusers, these rapists, they abused that sacred trust. And we are going to make them pay for it.
Any other?
Yeah, can Michael and Heather just talk about what's sort of been the most difficult part about all of this over the last few years and getting to the point where you can stand?
Do either of you want to tackle that?
All right. I was married for 20 years. And throughout that 20-year marriage, I was not a good husband. I'll be the first to say it. I had so many demons in my head. That's how it affected my life. I was an angry person. I drank to conceal that anger. Or not to conceal it, but I drank to try to make myself feel better, but that only got me angrier. I had 2 beautiful children. I wasn't the best father because of what goes on inside me. It wasn't until I got divorced and got introduced to a new woman in my life, who I'm now married to, a beautiful woman, Tracy, and she got me into therapy. Since that point going forward, being in therapy with Soulville, my therapist, Petey McGowan, I have learned how to start dealing with this on an adult level. Because in most cases, for anyone who is trying to hide this type of abuse, or who has to try to pretend it never happened and try to get on with life, you can't. You can try, but you're going to fail if you don't have help. And no one ever got me any help. My wife got me help. As soon as she found out about this, she had me sitting in front of a therapist. And, it affects your life in ways you can't even imagine. You say even over the last couple of years, the last few years I've been in therapy. And it took that therapy to get me to this point where I can have legal representation, where I can have a voice, and I can say something finally, and I can get it out there. Hey, this happened to me. It's not right. It's not right. It's never been right. And everyone just wants to turn a blind eye to it. That's how this seems to work. I hate to say that, because like I said, I still profess to be a witness. That being said, this is scary, because I'm just in shock still that this has gone on like this for so many years, and it's still going on. There are still victims out there. There are still people that are right now currently living through what I went through, which is hell. And again, the voice I'm having here today, the voice Heather has here today, is to bring attention to those victims. We need to find them. We need to get them out there. They need to know they don't need to be scared, because you can be put. I've been getting texts from my mom and dad all week. This is the wrong thing to do. You can't do this. This is not what you're supposed to do. And those are the people that are supposed to be there to fight for you.
Probably what's worse is not that they're just victims out there. There are molesters out there. They're still there. They're knocking on your doors. They're standing in the subways. They're in the airports. You don't know who they are because they don't tell you. They don't disclose. They don't warn parents in the congregation that the reason that man was disfellowship or reproofed meaning that he's given a little warning and removed from certain privileges, but there's no announcement made as to why he's being reproved. So people don't know. The ordinary congregants don't know. And for all they know, when they send their kids out on what they call field service to go knock on doors with this pioneer, this person who's maybe in charge of that, they don't know if he's a molester or not.
Are all of your cases filed in New York?
No. We have them all over the country, California, Ohio, Vermont, Connecticut, where else? We filed a lot around.
Even though the Jehovah's Witnesses are based in New York?
Yeah. Yes. How it's affected.
Actually, I didn't mention before, but Don used to give us alcohol before we'd go to bed, so that as we got older, I saw him abuse his daughter. We were in the same room a lot of the times, but he would give us orange juice, and it would have vodka in it. So I learned at a really early age that if I didn't want to deal with something, all I had to do was take a couple shots and go to bed. So I did turn into an alcoholic. I did do drugs. I have PTSD. I've been in and out of psychiatric hospitals probably since I was 20. So it's affected me in a lot of different ways, and it doesn't ever get better because a lot of times you're shut down and you don't get to tell your story. That's part of why I'm here today, so that I can finally say, yes, this is what happened. It was Don Nicholson, and he needs to be publicly known for what he does, and that's about it. Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you. Thank you all very much for coming. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Yeah, I know it wasn't easy, of course not, you'd be great.